1872. Winter on the Kansas prairie. A desolate, frozen expanse, ruled by a north wind that could bring even the strongest to his knees. The sky was the color of lead, the earth as hard as iron. In this ocean of nothingness stood the Wayside Inn, a thin promise of sanctuary, but inside there was no salvation. Only a seat of honor placed against a dark curtain. A trap where the air didn't smell of wood smoke, but of stagnant dust and the copper tang of frozen blood. It was run by a family of immigrants who'd lived together, worked together, and killed together. When the search parties finally unearthed the secrets of the apple orchard, the architects of this American nightmare were long gone, leaving behind a riddle that would freeze the American spirit for over a century. This is Gaslight Gallows, historical true crimes. Alfred Hitchcock guaranteed that multiple generations would grow up never looking at the innkeeper the same. Our generation grew up in the shadows of the Norman Bates-type characters and the Motel Hell-type films. So even if it was subconscious, we understood that the person putting out the welcome mat could also be the one who never let you leave. But in 1872, this fear wasn't a mainstream thought. Stopping at a roadside inn wasn't just a choice, it was a trusted necessity. The idea that your host would somehow be a predator never really entered your mind. On the Kansas prairie, the roadside inn was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where a weary traveler could get a warm meal and a good night's sleep. But for those who stopped at the Wayside Inn, the seat of honor was a death sentence. The Benders didn't just strip a man of his money and his belongings, but they took a basic human trust and they shattered it with the cold weight of an iron hammer. This is the Bloody Benders of Kansas. Long before it was known as the American frontier, this land had a name. It was the ancestral home of the Osage Nation, a people who had lived and hunted here for generations. In the 1800s, the road, known by settlers as the Great Osage Trail, was a path the tribe had carved centuries before. But in the years after the Civil War, a nation's hunger for land reached a fever pitch. In 1870, a new treaty was signed. The Osage were forced from their Kansas home and pushed south into a new, smaller territory in Oklahoma. Their rightful land, now deemed empty, was opened up for settlement. They came in waves, drawn by the promise of a new beginning on free land. Among them were 5 families of German spiritualists, seeking a place to build a new community. And among them was a family known as the Benders. The new settlers had come seeking a paradise, unaware that they had brought a nightmare along with them. On this haunted ground, a new and even darker legend began to grow. It centered on the family that ran the lonely inn. They were known as the Benders. There was the man they called Pa, John Bender Sr., a hulking, brutish giant who spoke in guttural grunts. There was the woman they called Ma, Elvira, so openly hostile that the locals nicknamed her the She-Devil. Their son, John Jr., was a man prone to unnerving and costless laughter, leading the locals to label him as simple-minded. And then there was Kate, the face of the operation, the bait in the monstrous trap. Kate Bender was a dangerous fantasy in the rough, lonely world of the Kansas frontier. She was magnetic, charismatic, beautiful, She advertised herself as a spiritualist and a healer, but the legend claims her services went far beyond fortunes and remedies. For the right price, she offered herself. It was an irresistible lure for the isolated men on the trail, and her parents, Pa and Ma Bender, didn't just allow it, they orchestrated it. They had forged a family as a perfect disguise, and had turned their own daughter into the perfect weapon.
If you're enjoying this story, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you always know when a new story is uploaded.
We will never know how long it took the Benders to perfect their monstrous system. We only know how efficient it was. It began with a smile. Kate would lead the chosen victim inside the family's small wooden inn, a single cramped room, heavy with the smell of boiled potatoes and something else, something metallic and sour. The room was divided by a single, stained canvas curtain. At dinner, she would place the traveler at the seat of honor, a title designed to soothe any man's fears. The chair was deliberately positioned so his back was to the curtain, and then Kate would work her dark magic. She would lean in, her voice a mesmerizing whisper, her eyes locking onto his. She spoke of fortunes, of spirits, of desire, distracting him with the promise of what was to come, pulling him so deep into her fantasy that he was completely oblivious to the elements around him. And as he was lost in her gaze, a shadow would move behind the canvas. Silent, patient, Pa Bender holding a heavy steel hammer, waiting for the perfect, unguarded moment. He never saw it coming. One final, charming smile from Kate, and then the world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain. The body would be dragged into the cellar, stripped of its valuables, the blood washed from the floor, and later, under the cover of a moonless night, John Jr. would help his father carry the corpse to the apple orchard and return it to the earth. The Benders had perfectly executed their plan, and they were just getting started. And so it began, the harvest. For 2 years, the Bender family worked their dark patch of land, and the prairie kept their secrets. The Great Osage Trail became a river of lost souls. A steady stream of men, settlers, prospectors, merchants, men with full money belts and no one in the world to know they were missing, would be drawn to the lonely light of the inn, and would simply vanish. There were whispers, of course. A name on a list of the missing, a horse found wandering without its rider. But on the prairie, tragedy was a constant companion, and a whisper is easily carried away by the wind. For 2 years, no one ever connected the disappearances to the strange, quiet family at the lonely inn. The whispers remained whispers, until one of those whispers became a shout. That shout would be for a man named Dr. William York. In the vast, lonely settlements of the Kansas prairie, Dr. York was more than a physician. He was a lifeline, a beacon of hope and compassion in a land still ruled by superstition. He was the man who would ride for days through a blizzard to set a child's broken bone, who would deliver a baby by candlelight in a sod house miles from anywhere. And in the winter of 1872, after a long trip tending to his patients, Dr. York was finally on his way home. His pockets were not full of gold, but his heart was full of the thought of his own family, the warmth of his own fire. The trail was cold, the Kansas wind a relentless force. As dusk bled into a frigid night, his horse began to struggle. Dr. York was last seen asking for directions to the nearest inn, a place to simply survive the night before the final leg of his journey. He was pointed towards the Bender's place. For a man bone-weary from his journey, the sight of Kate Bender and the warmth of the inn's fire must have felt like an answer to prayer. Here was a hot meal, a friendly face, a moment of rest. But the good doctor, a man who had spent his entire life helping others, let down his guard. He sat at the place of honor, charmed by Kate's conversation, completely unaware he was not a guest. He was the harvest. He never saw the canvas curtain parting behind him. He never saw Pa Bender's shadow fall over him, and he never saw the hammer. For Dr. William York, the long ride home was over. The Benders had claimed their most prominent victim. But this time, the prairie would not be allowed to keep its secret. Dr. York's brother was Colonel Alexander York, a powerful state senator and a man who did not suffer fools or accept excuses. When his brother vanished, he brought his own storm to the Kansas prairie. He arrived in the small, dusty township of Osage in Labette County, demanding answers. He put up reward money from his own pockets. He interrogated local officials. And his investigation, a desperate tracing of his brother's final steps, soon led him to a single, isolated point on the map. A lonely inn run by a strange family of German spiritualists. The colonel confronted the family. Pa and Ma were sullen and unhelpful, but the daughter Kate put on a performance. She was all charm and sympathy. With a look of deep concentration, she even offered to use her psychic powers to contact his brother's spirit, for a price, of course. But Colonel York was a man who had seen the horrors of a civil war. He was not a man to be fooled by cheap theatrics. He saw the cold, predatory intelligence behind her eyes. He left the inn that day not with proof, but with a cold certainty in his gut. His brother had entered this house, and he had never left. With no body and no evidence, the local authorities were powerless to act. The harsh Kansas winter set in, freezing the ground and any hope of a quick discovery. Colonel York was forced to wait, his frustration festering into a cold, hard rage. When spring finally thawed the frozen prairie, the whispers started again. More men had gone missing. The local community, now emboldened by Colonel York's presence, had finally had enough. A town meeting was called. The room was thick with fear and anger. This was no longer just about one missing doctor. It was about a community fighting back against a faceless evil. The decision was made. A search party of 75 grim-faced men was formed, a posse with a simple, focused mission. They would search every single homestead in the township until they found the truth, and their first stop would be the Bender place. When Colonel York and the posse arrived, they were not met by a family of killers, but by the eerie, howling silence of the prairie. The Bender Inn was deserted. The farm animals, left behind, were starving and skeletal. The family had vanished. A terrible, sweet smell of decay hung in the air like an old sign. The men searched the property. Inside the inn, they quickly found the cellar. Its stone floor was dark and sticky, caked with thick, dried blood that had seeped into the very earth below. It was a horrific sight, but the true horror was waiting outside. In the soft, tilled earth of the orchard, they noticed it. Strange, rectangular depressions in the soil. Too small for livestock, too shallow for wells. The men exchanged grim, knowing glances. One of them began to probe the ground with a long metal rod. And then a dull, sickening thud. He had hit something. They started to dig, and what they unearthed would become the stuff of legend. First, a boot. Then, the body of Dr. William York. Then another body. And another. A garden of the dead right in the Benders' own backyard. At least 11 victims in total, each with his skull brutally smashed in. In that moment, standing over the open graves, the men understood the great, terrifying paradox of the prairie. This vast open land, the symbol of American freedom, was not a paradise. It was a prison. It offered no walls to protect you, and no neighbors to hear you scream. The Benders didn't need a dungeon. They had the prairie. The Benders were gone. They had vanished into the vast emptiness of the prairie. What followed was one of the greatest manhunts in the history of the American West. More posses were formed. A massive reward was offered. Stories and sightings poured in from every corner of the frontier, but the family was never officially found. Their ultimate fate remains one of the frontier's most profound mysteries. But the mystery is deeper than just where they went. It's about who they were. Modern historians now believe the Benders were not even a real family at all. Their names, John, Elvira, and Kate, were likely aliases. Pa and Ma were probably not married, and John Jr. and Kate may not have been their children. Some theories even suggest they were husband and wife, posing as siblings. The Benders were a pack of predators who had manufactured a family identity as the perfect camouflage, which opens up a universe of terrifying possibilities. If they were not a family, but a gang, could they have simply split up, melting back into the river of humanity, pushing westward to kill again and again under new names and in new towns? Of all the theories, one is particularly chilling for the way it echoes through the dark histories of America. Some reported sightings placed the fugitives heading south towards the lawless, untamed borderlands of Texas, a place of rugged mountains and deep canyons where a person could truly disappear, a place they now call Big Bend. Is it possible that the evil of the Benders didn't die on the prairie, but simply found a new, wilder place to hunt? Most likely, we will never know for sure. The Bloody Benders were not just killers. They were a void, a question mark that the prairie swallowed whole. The land, where their house of horrors once stood, is now just an empty patch of Kansas farmland. But the story remains a permanent scar on the memory of the prairie. A chilling reminder that in the vast, lonely spaces of a new world, evil can sometimes find a place to put down roots and grow. The search for the Benders became a national obsession, but the prairie kept its secrets. Now, we've heard from some people who said the Benders were caught and they were handled with vigilante justice, but other theories think that they split up and went their own way. But regardless of where the Benders ended up, they left a stain on the American West that time has never been able to wash away. To bring this chapter of Gaslight Gallows to life, we're using what we call a throwback storybook style, where we're utilizing artificial intelligence, but we're doing it as a digital illustrator to help reconstruct scenes that history was unable to photograph. Now, each episode of Gaslight Gallows will have its own unique style as we build to the point where our end goal is to create a live-action version of the show. Now, if you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like and subscribe and share this, and join us on other platforms. We're on Instagram and Facebook and Patreon, or you can reach us at info@wildyetiFilms.com. And if you haven't seen it yet, we invite you to check out our first series called Expedition: Tales of the Big Bend, which is right here on this channel. I'm Grant Kauffman. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next chapter.